Welcome to the third part on the leadership segment. In the Accelerator, we'll be talking about exceptional organization, which is the doing part of leadership, just to ensure that you've got an eye on the system and everything is running efficiently. Now, the biggest issue we hear in sustainability is this. We don't have the budget, we don't have the resources. And honestly, you could say that about just about every other department. They don't have the budget. You can't imagine anybody saying that they've got too much money. Well, not normally. Some people do, some organizations. Anyway, we digress. So it's not that you're under-resourced, is what we want to say. It's that you are under-organized. And I want to give some examples. But before that, I just want to tap into this piece here, just to drive in the point a little bit more. So let's say that you have a great vision, great clarity in your vision, and you've done the relationship design exercises and you have great culture, but if you have poor organization, you're still quite likely to have a poor result. Things could just be not on time, quality is poor, inconsistent, service is lackluster, lots of other issues if there is poor organization. So the best way to drive that point across is actually with an example, with the toughest example that I could think of, and that's with a country. So not even like a sustainability department or a company like a startup, but with a nation. So there's a mystery country back in the 1960s that was constantly referred to as a malaria-infested swamp with corruption, low-skilled labor, very little natural resources. And in one generation, so now it's 2025, they were able to become this Singapore, one of the world's richest countries with phenomenal scores of standards of living, with healthcare and education, topping lists on as many lists as you would like to reach. So how did they do that? There were three key decisions that were highly contested when Singapore first became a republic, which Lee Kuan Yew, the founding father, you should totally look him up, when they first started. And people didn't like these decisions. Like, everyone has to speak English. They had all these different ethnicities of Chinese, all these like multiple different dialects of Chinese with Malay and Tamil and Hindi and all these different languages. And he said, no, we're all going to have to speak English if we're going to work together. Number two, there were some issues with the UK, and they were still importing back some of these people because he knew we need the right people for the right job. So importing the best talent, and of course, no corruption, which he was quite famous for putting all kinds of people behind bars, even if there were people in his camp. So the best way to kind of show how effective this is when you organize yourself exceptionally well is comparing it to another similar situation back then. So in 1965, Singapore became independent. Jamaica became independent in the 1962, so they were also leaving the UK. Island nations, similar population size, and 20 years later, Singapore focusing on organizing itself well, an HR strategy, you could say. They had this incredible workforce development plan that they put in place. And to make sure that a lot of the money that came to Singapore stayed in Singapore, like they built up the small business economy. You can see that it increased from $500 GDP per capita to 16,000, whereas Jamaica increased from 500, almost the same, to about 4,000. And now you can't even really compare. Singapore is one of the world's richest countries by GDP per capita, and Jamaica is at 6,000. So to reiterate what we were mentioning before about what made Singapore work really well was effective communication, ensuring that everybody could speak English, one core language, and get organized. Number two, to import the best talent, so you had the right or the best people for important jobs. And the lack of corruption or the fight against corruption ensured that projects were efficiently resourced. So if you needed $5 million to build a school, $5 million went to the construction of the school or the building of the school, as opposed to $1 million and a little bit here and there goes into people's pockets or overinflated profits. So a lot to learn from there. There is also a lot more in Singapore's development, which I'll put into the links below the video. So speaking about the power of communication, Lee Kuan Yew knew the power of words and slogans. And so internally in the government, there was a famous phrase where every button has to work. And it's something which is really simple that even the cleaners could understand. If they were going from one floor to another and the elevator button's not working, call somebody to get that working, because every button has to work. Everything needs to work as it should be. So what does that mean for you? Here's a little assignment for you to do some reflection on, to consider how you currently organize yourself. Are your processes effective? And just remember that there's nothing perfect. So when was the last time you reviewed your processes? We're going to break it down into 3 bits. We're going to talk a bit about getting things done from David Allen, who is phenomenal. I've been living by his methodology for over a decade, and it's helped me organize not just the initiatives and programs, but my businesses, being a dad and being a husband, and all these things which are really important to me. Couldn't recommend it enough. We're going to dive into a couple of different, one diagram and a framework that he uses. And then we're going to talk about some tools and just a couple of maps. So diving into the first thing that I'm going to show you is his famous diagram on how to get things done. And it is like a intentional process where you sit down for like a day or half a day. And if you do it more often, the shorter it gets, to start getting into what he calls stress-free productivity. It's possible. So the first thing that happens is that there's stuff that happens. And I like to do these in sessions. So I put everything out. Digital, physical, programs, projects, to-dos, everything's all out on one table, including my laptop, and you start processing it. And the first thing that you got to do is figure out, well, what is it? What's the intention here? What's the outcome? Is it actionable? If not, throw it away, incubate, or reference. So it goes into these 3 areas. If it is actionable and it's like a whole project, well, you got to review it and figure out what the first available action is. And if it's less than 2 minutes, just get rid of it, do it right away, or delegate it into another system, or defer it into your calendar or into some other reminder system, right? So that is, in short, how this process is done. But how does it actually work? How does it help you get to stress-free productivity and to help you prioritize and figure out what to do first? How does it organize you? There are 4 main steps. And the first one is to capture your thinking. So that's what we mentioned before, the stuff part. You just put everything together, anything and everything, to gain a better understanding of what you're doing and when you should be doing it. Because now you've got everything laid out. And you'll start to notice what you notice. And it's okay if it's still unclear. You'll get there, right? Because the next step is to figure out, well, what are the outcomes in those first steps, just like what you saw in that diagram. This helps you figure out, well, what are you trying to get accomplished? And to be very specific about the next actions. So one example maybe is that your boss has told you to eliminate and minimize waste across your whole organization, which is a big multitask thing. And you might think, well, what's my first step? I guess I got to figure out what waste we have. Figuring out what waste we have is not specific. So you have to go a little bit further and go, what's the very first step? And you might say, I need to get some kind of inventory, like figure out exactly what waste we have. So my next first step is to take an inventory. So go around to our facilities and offices, take photos of the bins and ask people, I guess, and figure out what kind of waste that we have, right? And you might think that feels like still not very specific. So you might say, I might have to schedule in maybe 30 minutes to work out a work plan of how I'm going to figure out what waste our organization actually produces. So you saw that train of thought. It's very helpful because it makes you think, well, now I'm actually really clear on what I need to do next. And that's to sit down and actually figure out how I'm going to go about doing this. That's a really nice first step. The thing that you might do is to say, well, when am I going to do that? This is definitely not a less than 2 minute thing, but scheduling that in is less than 2 minutes. So then you go off and schedule it, right? Now, step 3 is to use the right map. So we will do journey mapping quite extensively later on, so we won't cover it here, but I will show you a couple of examples that are not journey maps because we're going to cover them later. But what they do is they help you figure out what your job is, what your key area of focus is once you've kind of like organized it, in order for you to notice what you notice. And the reason why I want to put everything kind of in a map and organize it is that it puts everything together. The actions, the projects, the maps, your personal life, whatever it is. So we've done these as demos over the last few years even, where we've had, for example, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So his 4 quadrants, that's an example here. There have been some where people just put in a big circle and just map it all out and then start to organize it. To use a more sustainability related framework, or you can use this other map here. So Slapria is our food festival for good, and we needed to sort of organize like all the sustainability things that we had to do. So we said, what are the most important impact categories and actions and ideas that came up? And what happened was we said, well, here are the things that are most important to us. Let's put them at the core and just start brainstorming what we think we can do. And then after that, we had a lot of different ideas, and we said, let's reorganize this in terms of color. Well, dark green are things that we can do immediately, and then lighter green and then yellow are things that we're not going to do. And that helped us to organize what were the things that we could do in 2024, 25, 26, 27. And that ended up being put into a brief for the designer to say, well, let's commit to some of these things, like workout commitments we can actually do, and start developing a roadmap, right? Something that we'd actually use to communicate. So here's an example of having originally what was here was just a bunch of sticky notes, and then we clustered it, and then we organized it into something kind of pretty that we could look at and go, oh, there are a lot of different like colors of things that we could reorganize into a timeline, and actually gives us a strategy, like a roadmap that we can use. And then after that, you get straight into engaging, and that, just like what you saw on that food festival, and you can start to figure out what's going to happen in the short term versus the long term. And it is something that you're going to come back, and of course with sustainability, there has to be governance. You're going to be reassessing and readjusting once you've started. And lastly, here are some things that we personally use across different organizations that help us save time. So we map out a journey map. So I'm slightly skipping a step here because process mapping are things that I would assume that at this level you'd be able to do. You write down who's doing what, where, when, and how. Step 1, step 2, step 3. And once you start doing this and you are able to start putting time to things, you can start to optimize, but you need to be able to measure it first. So that's something which we're going to cover a little bit later, but at the same time, it's quite straightforward. So I'm going to use the rest of this time here to actually dive into some tech that we use to improve how we go about doing things. So this is pretty straightforward. I'm going to move on. We're also going to come back and review some of this in a future video on the mapping ones. So before we go, I'd like to share just some tidbits on tech that we use that have helped to really optimize and save a lot of time in how we do things. So HubSpot. So thank you to Startup Aotearoa for giving permission to just show a back end on something which is just made a fake thing for me to show you what that looks like. But instead of using Excel, we use HubSpot to help organize ourselves in all the different contexts that we have. So there are details, what's happened in here, when did we meet them, when did they open the email, like all these things are really important to help manage that process and get us the information that we need so that we know when to contact that person again or whatnot. So HubSpot is phenomenal, and it even includes ways of where we have created all these scripts and you just insert a template, and it saves you minutes and minutes and minutes. But when you add them up, it saves you hours, if not days, by not rewriting the same email. We got to that conclusion, or you can get to that same conclusion, when you start mapping out the process and figuring out, well, how much time does it take to do certain things? What are the things that we can automate and save time on? HubSpot, awesome. Not affiliated, currently pay for that service, or the opposite of affiliate. Use Tactic to summarize meetings. You will see that during the workshops. We'll be using Tactic to summarize all the action, who said what and who needs to do what when. Absolutely phenomenal. And another thing, and this is not so much tech, but partnering up is really important. So you'll see that later during the skill drills and the masterminds, the collaborative factor of getting different people into the room really saves a lot of time because there's more brain power, or somebody knows somebody has a great supplier that you can use right away. It saves you so much effort, right? So partnering up, and to start measuring time, this is something that we're currently using, is T-Metric. So this is where it's synced into everything that I'm using. This is actually me, people that I'm coaching, and I can click in when those different things happen. I can tag the tasks that I'm doing so I can start measuring how long things are taking me, and I can go back and review at the end of the month and go, is this right? Is this about right for quality work, or is this something that I believe that I can save a bit more time on? so I can spend more time with my family, right? And tons of project management software out there, from Asana to Trello, which we use, or Basecamp, right? So these are some things in tech that we use often. I really think that I cannot live without, or else it would just add hours and hours to my week and my months. So I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you in the next session.